course. Now, the next speaker is Professor Simona di Iulio, and once again, my apologies for my pronunciation, but the The title of the talk is, as you could read there, Comunicazione, Alimentazione and Sensorialità. I really ought to learn to pronounce that, given that's my area. And I'll pass it over to Professor Di Iulio.
Okay. And to... Allora, buongiorno a tutte e tutti.
Good morning to all of you. First of all, I'd like to thank the Bonduelle Foundation, in particular Lance de Pézé, for this invitation, which I accepted with great pleasure and great enthusiasm. And I thank the organizers for this initiative, for this meeting, and for comparisons about research projects. And we are meeting together on this opportunity, on this occasion. Now, talking about how to communicate sensoriality, and I will talk about a new perspective, that is the science, communication science. And this is an interdiscipline of human sciences studying the circulation of knowledge, rules, ideas in society. And the main theme of my presentation is the relation between communication, eating, and sensoriality. And this is constructed around this central question, how to communicate taste, and exactly how to communicate intersensoriality of taste. The perception of taste always involves several sensory organs, and we will explore three aspects of this matter as this advertising shows and translates in its verbal and visual language the sensorial qualities of foods, the physical aspects and the sensorial attributes of foods. And the second aspect that we will discuss is the way in which advertising shows sensorial experiences. So the experience of taste is translated into publicity. And the third point that will be the focus of this presentation is how publicity or advertising takes part in conveying knowledge about taste, and the space that education in taste and its role in the advertising. My thoughts are based on examples taken from a vast sample of advertisements for food products for children, and this was collected in the context of research funded by the French Research Institute. It's entitled Infancy and Fun Food, and this research had 5 teams working in different areas, and the aim of the research was to study the phenomenon of the emergence and dissemination of fun food. That is, those foods that associate the experience of eating with fun and play. This research dedicated one segment to studying advertising for food products for children, and in establishing this fun context around food, 4,500 advertisements were collected in Italian, German and French press from after the war to 2005. And in weekly reviews for a female public, Paris Match, Elle, Oggi, and in children's publications, Mickey Mouse and the French and German equivalents. In sum, the results of this research showed large differences in the way that advertising is made for children, whether the recipients are going to be the mothers or the children themselves. When advertising is addressed to the mothers, the emphasis is laid on the risks of a poor diet, poor food, and in the jargon for marketing, reference is made to fear appeal. So the fears are evoked, and then to reassure, talking about the trust that should be given to brands and products. Over time, the causes for the risk have changed, whereas after the war there was this fear of poor diet and poor hygiene, and in the 70s the fears were associated with the presence of chemical, harmful substances in the food, and more recently, particularly in France and Germany, in advertising for mothers, there was this fear of obesity, child obesity. During my presentation, you'll see that strategies changed over time in communicating to the public of mothers. In recent years, there's more and more concentration on risk and pleasure, taste, and the children's requests and the experts' knowledge. On the other side, talking about what is referred to children, these announcements made for children, there's the emphasis not on the risk but on the pleasure of eating, of tasting foods, but also the pleasure of having fun while eating, playing while you're eating. And advertising for foods with children as recipients concentrates on the link between food and the fantasy world of infancy. And so there's an association between a food and a figure, a figure taken from a fable or from cartoons or video games or other products for the cultural industry destined for children. Another evident fact is that of presenting foods, insisting on transgression of the rules and the tastes and expectations of adults. So advertising for children concentrates on food which is seen as something which is alternative to the adult world, as a rupture from adults' expectations. But let's come back to our initial theory. What is the role of taste? The role of sensoriality? Firstly, advertising communicates taste through presenting physical characteristics and sensorial qualities of foods. And this has identified some examples of advertising which the product is shown close up, so you can see certain visual, physical characteristics and some sensory characteristics. And so the publicity tries to translate into its language this synesthesia, the union of the senses aroused by food. So the flavor is evoked by the images rather than words. So the words used for describing taste seems rather poor, actually, although there are some neologisms which have remained in the collective memory. When publicity is for the mothers, it says that thanks to the visual appearance of the food, the product will be accepted and appreciated by children. The presentation, the form, the color make, in this case, these pasties pleasant to the children. This was a Bonduelle advertisement from 2005, or chocolate cream changes a slice of bread, giving it an anthropomorphic aspect. So this snack for children becomes something which makes the child enthusiastic. In advertising for children, the presentation of the product on its own is quite unusual. When this happens, and when the product is in the middle of the page, the emphasis is given to the novelty, the diversity, the unseen, the new aspect, or the visual aspect of this food product, if not the unusual, surprising characteristic of the shape and the color. An ice cream in the shape of a foot, for example, and the aspect of this, and these advertisements for children show this joking, comic aspect, and the message for the mothers gives this sort of register of affection or serious, based on expert knowledge. Another aspect, another sensory quality, that is the perfume, the odor of a food. The food advertising in the press rarely evokes the olfactive qualities of foods. And when it does so, it does it through this image rather than through words. And as in this case, you've got a drawing rather than a photograph. More frequently, advertising tries to recall the known odor of a food through re-evocations of past memories. For example, you associate in a Proustian fashion the image of a past which the child may know to evoke in his mind the perfume, the odor of this food in question, or as in this case, you want to suggest this new perfume linked to distant places. For this case, for example, we have the perfume of a bar of milk chocolate, which is associated to the flowers in a pasture in the mountains. Another aspect of the sensory qualities of a food, the consistency. There are some qualities that certainly have the upper hand. In particular, when we're advertising food for the adult public, the mothers in particular, there is this softness, the quality that most frequently is evoked in publicity. The picture again has a key role. The words in this advertisement are, particularly when you need to describe aspects and perceptive qualities and visual qualities, it has a rather secondary role. But talking about the consistency, the soft and crunchy are attributes that are most frequently evoked to underline the consistency of food for children. Whereas when we need to evoke a taste, a flavor, advertising directed to mothers talks about generic attributes, so advertising is rather poor, and the adjectives used for flavor are rather banal: good, exquisite, delicious, And the taste pleasure given by this flavor is developed more through the image. In the close-up, you've got this picture of the child who is enjoying the product, tasting it, and this shows the satisfaction for the mothers of having offered a food that the little child really likes. And for advertising directed to children, when you need to highlight the flavor of a food product, the accent is placed on originality, and you can see that copywriters can be very inventive, and they use unusual attributes to suggest how original and how surprising this product is. So the flavor can be crazy, fun, magic, or even good. And in this case, they talk about a crazy flavor of this chewing gum. Let's come to the second point that I wanted to talk about in my presentation, is how advertising narrates the experience, intersensorial experience of taste. Advertising doesn't communicate taste just by highlighting the product and its physical and sensory characteristics, but narrating experiences that children have had. When the advertisement is directed to the mothers, this talks about the pleasure in tasting the food, and so the idea is to arouse the mother's satisfaction seeing her child enjoy the product that's been advertised. When the advertisement is directed to children, often surprise is the element. The surprise of discovering unusual flavors. Not only when you want to stress the qualities, the sensorial qualities, you talk about surprise element, and also when you want to describe the experience of taste. The emphasis is placed on the surprise that these unusual flavors, sort of fizzy, bubbly, crackly. So there's a repertoire of neologisms, and through the words, they can tell the surprising sensory elements which are unusual, as in the case of this advertisement, referring to the terminology used in cartoons. The theme of a surprising experience is found in some advertisements meant for mothers. In this case, it's another type of surprise. The surprise of discovering a new taste, a new flavor. That is, appreciating food, in this case it's vegetables, and thinking that when you had an aversion or you disliked them. So this shows this sensory experience as something innovative and surprising, and it's on a different register. Another way of telling the experience of the intersensorial experience of taste or flavor is that of referring to the Proustian theme of evoking images, perfumes of distant places aroused by your taste sensations. In this German advertisement, for example, the drink evokes the sun of the tropics, for example, or in this other case, a cheese that can be spread evokes the memories of your holiday spent in the Alps. So this sensory experience and intersensorial experience of eating is associated with the memory of experiences in the past. But the central theme of this sensory experience in Food for Children is represented by associating taste with the imagination. And in this advertisement, there's history, figures, characters are transferred into food products. The advertisement draws on this repertoire of themes, characters, motifs from infancy, and it's shown in products that are derived or in associations with imaginary figures, and it's seen in this relationship with food and this imaginary world. So it becomes a link, a trait d'union between the imaginary world and the children's daily life. So eating an ice cream in the form of a Smurf, for example, is experiencing a sensory experience, having this sensory experience and trying certain sensations at the level of taste, but also having a semiotic experience and a cultural experience. So advertising contributes to shifting foods for children towards the sphere of fun and play, or linking foods to the cultural world of childhood. And so this is a kind of multiple consumption at different levels, that of the senses, at a semiotic and cultural level too. Advertising is one of the devices for communication which helps this mechanism. And then there are aspects of packaging or the design of the product. But advertising has an important role even on a historical level, because this phenomenon, which seems macroscopic, has distant origins. In the 1930s, there was this association of the food product with features which were drawn from the childhood culture. The third and last point that I wanted to talk about is conveying knowledge and education for taste. This aspect of communication of sensoriality in publicity is represented by transmission of knowledge and the way in which to circulate traditions linked with sensory experience. In some cases, advertising insists on the continuity of this taste experience. When you're talking to mothers, or in advertising for children, there's the familiarity of a taste. So to encourage acceptance of the food, the stress is laid on remembering these sensory experiences from the past. So the certainty of something that you already know, familiarity with it. So the flavors that are already known can make foods which children may refuse, make them acceptable. So if a child doesn't drink milk, if I put chocolate powder in the milk, the child will accept this flavor. In other cases, advertising invites you to change. So it elaborates a reverse strategy. That is, it suggests to mothers to face their children's resistance to flavors that they don't know, they haven't met before. It invites them to introduce this novelty and bring in new flavors. In this case, trying to face the neophobia, which is typical of children's behavior in eating habits, and to insist on novelty and innovation. In the interaction between adults and children, particularly between mothers and their children, there is already in the 1950s, there was this deep change. Because if in food advertising, in adult press, it's the mothers who convey knowledge and educate to taste, and they are the spokespeople, and they are expert nutritionists and dietologists. In the 1950s, children are presented as a consumer with his or her own needs. And adults are invited to bear in mind the children's requirements. In this case, the child is presented as an individual who has a right to express her will, and so her own needs and tastes and specific foods which are different from those of adults need to be proposed. And in this way, this pleasure for taste gives rise to conflicts between adults who supervise and children who are experimenting and are exposing themselves to danger. So they have, in this case, you've got this greedy child who is transgressing the rules imposed by the adults and who, far from his mother's gaze, is actually being greedy. And from about 2000, more and more frequently in France and Italy, there are advertisements who ask their mothers to follow up their children's needs. So the child is no longer seen as a passive individual who is going to be cared for by his mother, but he's an individual, and you have to respect his tastes and his preferences. And as this slogan says, so the essential fact of children's breakfast is that the children's got to love it or like it. In conclusion, I'd like to stress certain main points, such as advertising has contributed over time to define children's food as a complex whole, which unites the research for health aspects associated with nutritional aspects, which is important, but also this multi-sensorial aspect. We've seen that advertising tries to, in its own way and with its own tools, to make this synesthetic characteristic of sensoriality, taste, odors, shapes, forms. We've spoken about the possibility of manipulating food. And all of this goes together with the symbolic and imaginary content. So advertising gives cultural meanings to sensorial perception. And this, which is aroused by foods, is aroused by feelings and desires. And it's also builds a social identity associated to age and gender. And sensoriality in this social context has social meanings, and advertising contributes to building and consolidating and changing. We should also say that sensory perception is seen in different food traditions. All the means of communication that I've just spoken about are transversal. They are cross-cutting in the countries that we've considered. And we know that these features are homogeneous, but this examination of this big body of information reveals diversities, not only linguistic, but also the type of product which is advertised, whereas in Italy the majority of products advertised directly for children, directly to children, are these snacks. And in France it's above all milk-based products, and in Germany it's cereal-based products. And this neutral area where children can have almost independent access without this filter, excessive filter of adults. And finally, I think that we should say that the rhetoric of taste is closely linked to the historical context in which it is produced. And in this specific case, or for food products for children, it's linked to the way in which childhood is conceived. The strategies have changed over time according to the way in which relationships between adults and children have changed, between mothers and children. With that, I've finished. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Very interesting indeed. So we have time for any questions. Yes, Katrina.
Grazie per la presentazione molto interessante.
Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I was curious about something. Essentially, you in your introduction, you spoke about fun foods. But do you believe that the same strategies, the same ambits or scopes could be successful even when these communication strategies, basically these consumption strategies, can be successful even when the product type changes? In other words, if you're not speaking about the snack or the candy, and it would be other types of healthy food products, I'm thinking, that perhaps these strategies are linked to accepted sensorial qualities. You spoke about creaminess, crispiness, crunchiness, and so on and so forth. And but maybe even if it is a surprise, it doesn't last long, like a burning candy. You learn about that characteristic, and then it's not a surprise anymore. So, but don't you think that this is something for good for a short time, or it can be used also for a sort of a regular consumption when these foods have a good nutritional value? Thank you very much for your question. About the fun food, behind fun food label, you don't have only junk food, where these junk products and food products that are meant to last for a short time, but rather there is a trend to present food, for children within this framework. But this is something that came about over time. And at first there were candies, this sort of a free zone of food that children could have access to freely or directly, but increasingly more often other food products that belong to other categories that follow this same logic, or such as yogurt in two colors, for instance, that can be mixed up in a playful manner and allow the child, for instance, to see what happens when you mix up two different colors. For instance, in France, there is a very famous example of a fun food. It's a cheese that can be manipulated as if it was Play-Doh before eating it. And so when we speak about fun food, you immediately think about junk food. But fun food, there is a trend, there is a general trend that is going through the entire eating food products for children, at least in advertisement.
Any further questions?
Hai accennato ad un certo punto.
You were speaking about manipulating food or handling food. And I believe that advertisement, lately, or commercials, focused mainly on food preparation. And not only when you refer to raw materials, even for children. So I was wondering whether, out of your observations, this is a strictly Italian message in the advertisement, or is it happening elsewhere? I did not speak about it, but there is an entire area that is very interesting when it comes to advertisement for mothers, because this is something, food preparation is not something that is dealt with children's advertisement, but this is something instead that is dealt with when it comes to advertise those products with mothers. And it is surprising, though, that within a few decades, the industrial food production that initially was presented as a sort of quality, hygiene, safety, slowly started to become suspicious. So immediately after the Second World War and until the 60s, the production of jams was depicted within jam factories with blue-collar workers that were, that had a sort of a nursing attire to promote this idea of hygiene. And then that same approach also affected other values such as tradition, wholesomeness. They made, homemade products or food products. And, there were other sources of guarantee of the quality of the food product. And then within, all of this happened within a few years.
Thank you very much.